Now I give the floor to Marianne Clayton, a distinguished lawyer and state aid expert. I'm always very happy to discuss and listen to what she has to say. Marianne is going to, and it's of course a pleasure to have her on today. So Marianne is going to present an analysis of a key provision of CISAF. Marianne, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure. I will share my slides now, hoping it will work. Do you see them?
Yes.
Very good. So off I go. So I will be talking about the temporary electricity price relief for energy intensive users, which is section 4.5 of the CISAF. Mr. Papsch already talked about it a little in his presentation, so I will not repeat what he has already said, because I'm also conscious of the time. So I will go to the main point he hasn't covered. First point, which I think is very important, is what is the raison d'être, the reason for this specific section. So this specific section is an interesting one because it comes from a demand from the stakeholders. We already had it in the TCTF as a really temporary measure, and now it's entering as a more stable measure, so to speak. So it's the result really of the fact that over the recent years, there has been a significant increase in the electricity prices, and there's been a fear that due to this increase in the prices and also the gap with the other member states or other big world partners, there would be a risk that some companies may decide to leave the EU and relocate outside. So in order to avoid what is known as this carbon leakage, it was decided that something had to be done at EU level. It was also mentioned in the famous Draghi report that something needed to be done, but not anything. It should be a measure which would be temporary and which would also take into account the fact that the differences between the different member states with the different prices and different markets should be reflected. So this is what is the reason for introducing this section 4.5. So let's have a look and see exactly how these concerns that I've just presented have been taken on board. So let's start with the scope and the eligibility. So as I mentioned before, we already had this kind of measure of temporary relief for high prices for electro-intensive in the TCTF, but it was based on a different legal basis. It was based on the serious disturbance to the economy. Now we go back to the usual, more standard legal basis, which is Article 107.3c of the TFEU. Interesting to note that we are really talking here about a measure, a price relief measure. There is a measure regarding tax levies, but this possibility to deal with tax levies and to reduce them for electro-intensive users is addressed in the SEAG, so it's a different measure. So who can benefit from this measure? So as we said before, it's electro-intensive users, but it needs to be also beneficiaries that will make an investment. So it's kind of a transactional approach to state aid. You can get state aid to a certain level if you comply with certain conditions, but you need to do something in return. You need to invest in green transition measures. The CISAF, as it is drafted, doesn't really give so much indication as to the type of measures that are concerned. Could be renewables, energy in efficiency. So this is quite a wide definition. Member states can actually really have quite a big margin of maneuver here. They can grant reductions from the wholesale electricity price, irrespective of the source of supply. So it could be auto generation, it could be electricity supply contracts, and it could be grid supply. So what sectors are we talking about? This is very important, of course, because we're looking at a measure which is really targeted at a certain type of company, targeted at electro-intensive users. So we can refer back to Annex 1 of the CEAG. As I explained before, there is a provision in the CEAG, which is section 411, which targets really the possibility to have a reduction on certain type of levies for electro-intensive users. So the electro-intensive users have been defined in an annex to the CEAG. So we're looking at the typical companies we would think of, manufacture of flat glass, cement, etc. Or there's another condition, which is more scientific approach to the definition of what is the electro-intensive for the purpose of the CISAF. So we have different criteria, which I've presented on the slide, and it's basically really making sure that the measure targets companies that are, for whom there is really electro-intensive use. So there needs to be a proportion of how important is the electricity cost in the total costs. This is to reflect what is an electro-intensive, but there's also another criteria, which is that the exposure to the trade. Because of course the issue is also to make sure that those companies would not want to leave the EU. So here you have the different conditions that need to be met in order for a company to be qualified as an electro-intensive. The conditions, which are the non-Annex 1 conditions, is for the member state to really prove that the company or the sector concerned meets these criteria. So there needs to be supporting data, and it needs to be confirmed by an independent expert. Another condition is that the aid must be granted via a transparent, non-discriminatory scheme, and there needs to be an estimated budget. It's important to specify here that member states, again, they have quite a lot of flexibility, and they can really decide to focus on a specific sector. And this will depend on the economy, on the member state, on the priorities of the member state. So they can really limit the scheme to a specific sector, taking into account the exposure to electricity costs or the importance of the sector, the strategic importance of the sector for the economy, or also security or resilience of the internal market. But of course, we're in the state aid world and we're in the EU law world. Such criteria, they should of course not be discriminatory. They must be justified. They must be based on real justified reasons. And they must be, of course, applied in the same manner to all the undertakings concerned. This we go back. We look at the undertakings. If they're in a similar factual situation, they belong to the same sector, they should be treated the same way. The member state cannot use this as an excuse to discriminate. Next issue is incentive effect and proportionality. Of course, in the state aid world, in order for an aid measure to be compatible, fundamental principle, there needs to be an incentive effect, and the aid must be proportional. So the incentive effect is that, of course, the aid must be granted in a manner that it will change the behavior of the beneficiary. In the case of Section 4.5, this principle translates as in that the aid must be applied for and paid within the year of cost or the next year. Proportionality limits here, it's really the core of the Section 4.5. Proportionality limits. What is proportionality in state aid? Proportionality means that aid that is given must be exactly the exact amount of aid. It should be the minimum amount of aid required to obtain the objective which is pursued. And here we go back to the rules of the 450s, which Mr. Papsch mentioned earlier. Here we have the three first 50s. The next 50 we will find in the following slides. So what are these 450s? The first one is that the aid must be maximum 50% of reduction of the average wholesale electricity price. 50% reduction over maximum 50% of the annual compensation. And then there is a price floor which is applied, which is that it applies only if we're looking at equal or maximum above 50 euros per megawatt hour. So these are the three standard principles that need to be complied with. And then we have the number 450 rule, which is that, as I said before, we're in a bit of a transactional approach to state aid here. So in order to benefit from the aid, subject to the conditions I've presented before, the beneficiaries must invest more than 50% of the aid into decarbonization-related projects. So they get the aid, but they must give something back in return. Eligible investments include, it could be new investments, but it can also be modernization or retrofitting. And again, it could include renewable energy generation capacities, energy storage solution, demand-side flexibility, energy efficiency improvements. There can be different options. An important point that we really need to stress is that the investments themselves, which are made as a transaction for the state aid, so to speak, these investments cannot benefit from any other form of aid. There is no double funding allowed, and the projects must be operational within 48 months of the grant of aid. So we can see here that there are quite strict conditions and that the investments must really take place. Possibility to benefit from a bonus of an additional 10% support, so in addition to the 50, if more than 80% of the total investment concerns demand flexibility. There is a strong focus, positive focus on investing in demand flexibility and improving flexibility. The member states will have an obligation to verify and to report annually on these investments. So I've provided you now for the general presentation. As Mr. Patch said before, the support may last for up to 3 years. Of course, we're not talking here about the duration of the CISAF, the legal text. We're talking about the support granted on the basis of the CISAF, which may last up to 3 years, and all payments must be finalized by 31st of December 2030. So this CISAF document is very interesting, offers new possibilities. It's very recent. So regarding the issue of this particular section, we don't have any decision yet by the Commission, So we will have to see. How. We will have to see how it goes, and see, yes, how things will evolve. As always with the state aid measures, it's very good to offer an interesting toolbox for the member states to introduce new schemes, but it all depends, of course, at the end of the day, of the member states. Do they actually want to implement the measure or not? It's also true that we have a floor of 50 euros per megawatt hour as the price. So member states have different price levels in their own countries. So it's not as attractive for all of them to introduce this measure.
Thank you very much, Marianne. It's indeed a very important thing that European Union must find, let's say, certain tools to have a reliable and consistent industrial policy, because I witness that also here in Greece every day. Energy intensive users, especially in this region, but I guess this is overall the same, do complain about high energy costs and the fact that there is something that I would call perhaps a regulatory asymmetry between them and their competitors from third countries with whom they are in direct competition, even in European markets, as regards end users and customers. And when your competitor has not this state aid problems that you, of course, have to have in order not to have a distorted market in the European Union, then you have an overall distortion of competition that is actually to the detriment of European industrial users. So it's of course important that public money is being spent in a rational manner. But on the other hand, this, let's say, international background and the fact that the European Union is not a fence, but actually European industrial clients of electricity suppliers to compete also with other undertakings from third countries, is a very interesting factor that has to be taken into account. And I really hope that CISAF will be a transparent but also flexible instrument for them to somehow cope in this very difficult circumstances. Once again, thank you very, very much, and I will be very much looking forward if you could find the time to contribute to the scientific publication that will follow. And my best regards also to Maria, which I had the pleasure of meeting the other day in Berlin. Thank you very much, Marianne.
Thank you.